Kieran Dales was 20 minutes late, soaked from the rain, and juggling a fussy 5-year-old named Zayden while trying to balance a tray with 2 hot chocolates. The only table left in the cramped downtown cafe was half occupied by a woman in a sharp navy coat, sunglasses pushed up into her chestnut curls, typing furiously on a laptop. He hesitated, shifting Zayden on his hip. "Excuse me," he said, trying not to sound as desperate as he felt. "Could we maybe share this table, just for a bit? My son's about to melt down and I promised him whipped cream." The woman looked up, eyes locking onto his with surprising warmth. She blinked, then smiled easily. "Of course. Please sit." She closed her laptop without hesitation and pushed her quass closer to her side. Kieran nodded gratefully and helped Zayden into the chair across from her. "Thank you. You just saved me from a full-scale tantrum." "Happy to help," she said, watching as Zayden dug into his hot chocolate with both hands like it was treasure. "He's adorable. I'll remind myself of that next time he screams because his socks feel too loud," Kieran said dryly, loosening his damp jacket. She laughed genuinely. "I'm Claire Kensington, Kieran, and this is Zayden." He's got strong opinions about socks and an even stronger love for marshmallows. Zayden looked up. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Claire leaned in like he was the most important person in the room. "Absolutely. Stegosaurus is my favorite." Zayden nodded approvingly, then returned to his drink. Kieran gave her a grateful look. "You're a miracle," Claire smiled, but there was something unreadable in her eyes as she watched him. She noticed the worn cuffs of his jacket, the way his shoes were still damp, how tired his eyes looked even when he smiled. "You live around here?" she asked casually. "Yeah, 2 blocks away. I work construction well when there's work. Things have been slow. I'm picking up handyman gigs where I can." Claire's heart tugged. "That must be tough," Kieran shrugged. "It is what it is. As long as I can keep the lights on and Zayden fed, I'm fine." He didn't say it like he was fishing for sympathy. Just facts. Claire studied him, this strong, kind man who had no idea who she really was, because Claire Kensington wasn't just some friendly woman in a cafe. She was CEO of Kensington and Vale, one of the fastest-growing real estate firms in the city. Her face was in business magazines, her name on Forbes lists, but she hated that part sometimes. The meetings, the boardrooms, the fake smiles, out here, with this man and his marshmallow-covered kid. She felt human. Zayden suddenly got up, climbed into Kieran's lap, and whispered, "Dad, I gotta pee." Kieran stood quickly. "Can you watch our stuff?" he asked Claire. "Of course." She smiled. As they disappeared into the restroom, Claire stared at the half-empty hot chocolate in front of her. The way Kieran had looked at his son, like Zayden, was the only thing that mattered in the world stuck with her. She'd dated hedge fund managers, venture capitalists, even a movie producer once. They'd all talked about their stock portfolios more than they'd talked about people. But Kieran. He looked like he'd take on the world with bare hands if it meant his son smiled. When Kieran returned, his hand ruffling Zayden's curls, Claire stood and grabbed her coat. She hesitated. "Hey," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "There's a community dinner at St. Luke's Church on Friday. I volunteer sometimes. Free food, good people, you should come." Kieran looked surprised. "You sure?" "Yeah, it's nothing fancy, but Zayden might like it, and I think you could use a break." He smiled slowly. "Thanks, that actually sounds really nice." Claire nodded once, then slipped out the door, disappearing into the drizzle. Kieran sat back down, watching the door for a moment longer than necessary. Zayden looked up at him. "She was pretty," Kieran chuckled. Yeah, she was. But he had no idea that the woman who just walked out was a billionaire CEO who'd already started falling for a soaked, tired single dad with a marshmallow-stained kid. And Claire had no idea why she couldn't stop thinking about the way Kieran had said, "It is what it is." Because something about him made her want to change what was. The scent of roasted vegetables and spiced cider drifted through the basement of St. Luke's Church, mingling with the low hum of conversation and the occasional burst of laughter. Claire stood behind the serving table in a cream-knit sweater and jeans, ladling stew into bowls with practiced ease. Her heels were traded for clean sneakers, her makeup minimal. No one in the room knew she'd spent her morning reviewing investor portfolios, and negotiating a commercial property bid worth over $50 million. She glanced toward the entrance as two figures stepped into the room. Kieran, in a clean flannel shirt and jeans that had been mended at the knee, held Zayden's hand. The boy's eyes lit up as he took in the colorful paper lanterns strung across the ceiling and the long tables filled with smiling strangers. Claire didn't wave. She waited. Kieran's gaze swept the room, and when he spotted her, something shifted in his expression. He made his way over, weaving through the crowd with Zayden trailing behind. "You weren't kidding," he said once they reached the table. "This place is packed." "It usually is," Claire replied, handing Zayden a bowl. "Hope you're hungry. That's Chef Kelly's lentil stew. People fight over seconds." Zayden took a cautious sniff, then dug in with enthusiasm. Kieran accepted a bowl as well. "Thanks for the invite." "He's been excited about this since Tuesday." "I'm glad you came," Claire said, stepping out from behind the table. "Want to sit?" They found a spot near the far wall, beneath a faded mural of children playing in a meadow. The folding chairs creaked under their weight, and Kieran balanced his bowl carefully on his knee. Claire watched him for a moment, then said, "You're good at this." "Good at what?" "Being present. Most people don't actually listen when they're with someone. You do." Kieran gave a quiet laugh. "I think it comes from spending time with a 5-year-old. If I zone out, I miss the part where he decides the couch is a trampoline." Claire leaned back slightly. "You ever have time for yourself?" "Not really, but I don't mind. I used to think my life would look different by now, but..." "It's not bad, it's just different." Claire's fingers tightened slightly around her spoon. "What did you think it would look like?" He tilted his head, considering. "I thought I'd still be married, maybe own a house, coach Little League, suburban basics." She didn't ask what happened. He didn't offer, but something in the way he looked at Zayden, who was now sharing a knock-knock joke with an elderly woman across the table, told her that whatever had happened, it had made him sharper, quieter, but not bitter. "I thought I'd be married by now too," Claire said finally. Kieran looked at her surprised. "Really? I always imagined some kind of partner, someone who'd challenge me, maybe even argue over what color to paint the kitchen." He smiled faintly. "What stopped you?" Claire hesitated. "Sometimes I think I've built a life that's too big for anyone else to fit into." He didn't flinch. He didn't ask what she meant. Instead, he said, "Maybe you just haven't met someone who could carry their own weight." Their eyes met, and something flickered between them, unspoken but heavy and real. Before either could speak, Zayden returned with a paper crown on his head and a cookie in each hand. "Dad, she let me be king of the food table," Kieran grinned. "Sounds about right." Zayden climbed into his lap without ceremony and began nibbling a cookie. Claire watched them, her chest tightening around something she didn't know how to name. Later, after the tables had been cleared and the last of the lanterns had been taken down, Claire walked them to the door. "It's getting colder," she said, noticing Kieran's light jacket. "Will you be okay getting home?" "We're good." "He'll fall asleep halfway there." She nodded, then crouched slightly to meet Zayden's eyes. "Thanks for being a great king tonight." He gave her a cookie crumb smile. "You're welcome." Claire stood and looked at Kieran. "I'm glad you came." "Me too." They stood there for a moment longer than necessary. Neither moved, then Zayden tugged at Kieran's sleeve. "I'm tired." Kieran nodded. "Good night, Claire." She watched them walk away into the night, the streetlights casting long shadows ahead of them. Back inside, the room felt too big, too quiet. Claire sat on one of the empty chairs and stared at the spot where they'd been. She didn't know what she was doing. She'd never let anyone close like this, not without contracts or strategy, but Kieran hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't tried to impress her. He just showed up with a tired smile and a boy who called her pretty and wore a paper crown like it meant everything. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like Claire Kensington, CEO, she felt like Claire, and that scared her more than anything. Claire didn't expect to see Kieran again so soon, but when she stepped out of the elevator in the lobby of the Kensington and Vale building 2 days later, there he was standing in front of the reception desk in a navy work shirt, holding a clipboard, looking equal parts focused and lost. He hadn't seen her yet. She paused mid-step. Her assistant, Serena, was pointing toward the elevator bank, giving him directions. He nodded, adjusting the strap of a tool bag slung over his shoulder. Claire walked over, steadying her voice. "Kieran," his head snapped up. Claire, he blinked, clearly trying to make sense of the setting, her tailored pants, the marble floors, the gold-trimmed logo behind the desk. I didn't know you worked here, he said cautiously. I don't, she said without missing a beat. I own it, his grip on the clipboard tightened. You're the Kensington in Kensington and Vale. I am. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, slowly, he exhaled. You didn't think that might be worth mentioning, Claire's voice stayed calm, and if I had, would you have come to the dinner? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe not. She nodded once, then glanced at the clipboard in his hand. Why are you here? Got called for a maintenance issue on the 22nd floor, something with the east-facing windows, her brows lifted. You work for Darden Contracting, not exactly. They subcontracted some small jobs out to local independents. I got lucky. Claire turned to Serena. Assign someone else. Send Kieran's invoice directly to accounts payable, full rate. Kieran stepped forward. Claire, don't, I need this job. You'll be paid, she said, her tone firm. But not here, not today. I can handle it. I know you can, that's not the point. He looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then what is boundaries, she said. This. Whatever this is between us, it needs room to grow. And I can't have you fixing window latches on my executive floor while I'm trying to figure out if I want to ask you out. His expression softened, just slightly. You want to ask me out? I'm considering it, she said, her lips curving. But you're making it hard. He shook his head, a dry laugh escaping. This is wild, I know. And you're really the one who signs the checks here, with a very expensive pen, yes. He looked down at his boots. I can't show up in this building again, can I? She hesitated. Not unless you're here for me, not for work. He glanced up, eyes meeting hers. Then I guess I better find a babysitter. She gave a small nod. Tomorrow. I'll pick you up. I don't own a suit. I didn't ask you to. Claire turned and walked back to the elevator, leaving him staring after her. The next evening, the Dodge Grand Caravan parked outside his building looked comically out of place next to the sleek black Aston Martin idling at the curb. Claire stepped out, wearing a deep plum coat over a silk blouse and leather boots. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. Kieran stood on the sidewalk, shifting his weight. You didn't have to come all the way. I wanted to. A silver-haired woman stepped out behind him. I'll keep an eye on the little one, she said kindly. You two have fun, Kieran introduced her quickly. Mrs. Downing lives upstairs. She watches Zayden a few afternoons a week. Claire thanked her, then turned to Kieran. Ready? He hesitated. Where are we going? I made a reservation. But I'm flexible. The restaurant sat on the 38th floor of a tower overlooking the river. Candlelight flickered across white linen tablecloths. A pianist played near the bar, and the waitstaff moved like dancers in crisp uniforms. Claire caught the look on Kieran's face as they were led to their table. If you hate this, we can leave. He shook his head slowly. I don't hate it, I'm just trying to understand how we got here. She tilted her head. You mean how a guy in steel toe boots ended up being waited on by a man who probably earns more than he does in a month? Something like that. Claire leaned forward. You think this is about money? He looked her in the eye. Isn't it? No, she said. It's about you. The way you look at people like they matter. The way you talk to your son like he's the most important person alive. That's rare, and I notice things like that. He was quiet for a beat. Then, I've never had anyone say anything like that to me. Then you've been spending time with the wrong people. Their food arrived steamed sea bass for her, grilled steak for him. Conversation flowed easier after that. Topics shifted to music, old jobs, books they'd started but never finished. Claire told him about a summer she'd spent working at a bakery, how it had been the only time in her life people smiled just because she handed them something warm. Kieran leaned back in his chair, watching her. You know what I keep thinking? What? That you could be anywhere right now. With anyone, but you're here, with me. I'm exactly where I want to be. And what happens after this, I don't know, she admitted. But maybe we find out. He studied her for a moment, then reached across the table and took her hand. I'm not perfect, Claire. I'm not looking for perfect, she said. I'm looking for real. And for the first time in years, Kieran believed someone truly meant that. Kieran stood frozen in the middle of Claire's sun-drenched penthouse living room, one hand still inside his jacket pocket. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a painting, but it was the room itself that caught him off guard. It wasn't just elegant, it was weightless. Nothing cluttered, nothing wasted. A piano sat near the window, untouched but polished. A vase of white lilies rested on a glass console table. The walls were soft taupe, the floors a pale oak. It felt like breathing in the middle of chaos. Claire unwrapped a silk scarf from around her neck and dropped it onto a side chair. "You okay?" He turned slowly. "I didn't picture this. You live like..." He stopped himself. She walked past him toward the kitchen, casually opening a bottle of wine. "Say it. Like someone who forgot what paper towels cost." Claire laughed quietly, pouring 2 glasses. "Fair." He stepped closer, accepting the glass but not drinking. "This is your world, and it's not just expensive. It's untouchable." Her tone remained gentle. "Then why are you still standing here?" He hesitated. "Because I don't want to walk away from something good just because I don't know how to fit into it." Claire leaned on the counter, her eyes searching his. "You're not furniture, Kieran. You don't have to match the room." He exhaled slowly, then set down the wine and looked out at the view. "You must have had people try to use you for your money, your name, more times than I can count. And you still trust people." "I trust what I see. Not what I'm told." He turned back to her. "And what do you see when you look at me? A man who shows up, who doesn't flinch when someone tells him the truth, who makes his son feel safe, and who right now is terrified he's not enough." Kieran looked down at his hands. "I don't know how to be someone who belongs here." Claire walked around the island until she stood in front of him. "Then don't try, just be someone who belongs with me." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and touched her face carefully, like he was still unsure she was real. "You scare me," he said quietly, "because I'm starting to need you." She wrapped her fingers around his wrist. "Then we're even." The next few weeks moved like a current neither of them could resist. They didn't try to define it. Claire met Zayden again during a Sunday park day, bringing a kite that flew so high it vanished into the clouds. Kieran made her laugh so hard at a diner, one night she accidentally snorted coffee through her nose. She attended a small open mic, where he read a short story he'd written in high school, an assignment he'd forgotten, until Zayden found the folded paper in a box of tools. She learned he'd once dreamed of teaching. He learned she played cello until her father pressed her into business school. Every layer they peeled back exposed something raw but honest. One evening, as they sat on the roof of her building with takeout containers between them, Kieran looked at her sideways. "I've been thinking about starting my own company." Claire didn't look surprised. "What kind?" "Residential renovations. Small scale. No frills, just honest work. I've got enough saved to get a license and file paperwork, but I don't have a place to run it from." She wiped sesame oil from her lip with her thumb. "You just need a desk and a door." "I need a chance." She turned toward him. "Then you'll have one." "No," he said quickly. "Not from you. I don't want to be your project." "You're not," she said. "But if you're looking for office space, I have a unit in the East District I haven't leased yet. You can pay what you can afford until you have your footing. No strings." He studied her face. "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe in people who show up." It rained the day Kieran signed the lease. Claire didn't come with him. He didn't ask. Instead, he brought Zayden, who drew a dinosaur on the corner of the front window with a dry erase marker and declared it their business mascot. By the end of the first month, he had 3 jobs lined up and a logo printed on the side of his truck. Claire came by once, just to see the place. She didn't offer advice. She just brought coffee and smiled when she saw the sign on the door, Dales & Co. Homeworks. That night, she found a note in her coat pocket. "I don't know what this is yet, but I know I want to find out." Weeks turned into 2 months, then 3. Claire's board noticed her softened edges. Her assistant noticed she smiled more. Her competitors noticed she wasn't at every networking event and couldn't figure out why. She didn't tell them about the man who now kissed her forehead before she left for work. Or the boy who ran to her at the door like she'd been gone a year instead of a day. Or the way her life, for the first time, felt like it was more than quarterly earnings and strategic mergers. One night in early spring, she came home to find Kieran in her kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes for dinner. "Zayden insisted," he said, nodding toward the living room where the boy was building a pillow fort. Claire dropped her bag and walked over. "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to." He slid a plate toward her. "We have a vote. The pancakes are heart-shaped. That was his idea." She looked at the lopsided stack and laughed. "They look like lungs." Kieran leaned on the counter. "Claire," she looked up. "I love you." She didn't blink. "Say it again." He stepped closer. "I love you, and not because of this apartment or the way you make things easier, but because you made me want more of everything." She touched his face. "Then don't ask me to marry you." He blinked, confused. "Why not?" "Because I'm going to ask you." He stared at her, then laughed softly. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." Zayden's voice cut through the moment. "Can I be the ring bearer?" They both laughed. 6 months later, in a garden behind St. Luke's lined with wildflowers and folding chairs, Claire walked toward Kieran in a satin gown she'd chosen without a second opinion. Zayden stood between them, holding a velvet pillow with 2 simple bands. There was no orchestra, no champagne tower. Just promises spoken beneath string lights and the sound of someone crying softly in the 3rd row. Kieran kissed her like she was the only thing that had ever made sense. And for the first time in either of their lives, they knew what it meant to be chosen not for status or name, but for something deeper, for love, for home. The first spring after their wedding came with unexpected warmth, sunny days that stretched long into twilight, and a sense of calm that neither Claire nor Kieran had ever known. From the outside, their lives looked like a contradiction. The billionaire real estate mogul and the blue-collar contractor building a life together. But inside the 4 walls of their shared home, it was seamless. Kieran's renovation business was expanding faster than he'd planned. He'd hired 2 full-time workers, rented a van with his logo painted on the side, and finally stopped worrying about whether the lights would stay on. Claire never interfered with how he ran things, but she did quietly connect him with clients who valued honesty over polish restorations, community centers, small business owners who needed someone who cared. One afternoon, Claire walked into his office carrying a brown paper bag. He looked up from a blueprint. "You brought lunch twice this week. People are going to think I married rich or something." "You did," she said, setting the bag on his desk. "And I'm going to keep feeding you until your team stops trying to live on vending machine burritos." He unfolded the bag and grinned. "Is that the lemon chicken from Leela's, with extra rosemary? You're welcome." He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You know, I used to think being with someone like you would make me feel small." She raised an eyebrow. "And now I realize I've never felt more seen." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Zayden made this." He said, "It's for your office." Kieran opened it. A stick-figure family stood under a crooked sun, each of them labeled in messy crayon, "Me, Dad, and Claire Aka, Boss Lady." He laughed, setting it on the shelf behind him. He nailed the likeness. Claire glanced around the room. "I like it here. It feels like you." He stood and came around the desk, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It feels like us." They didn't say anything else after that. They didn't need to. A few weeks later, Claire held a soft launch for a new housing development aimed at first-time buyers, an idea she'd conceived after talking with Kieran about struggling families. She invited only a handful of press, keeping it low-key by design. At the event, Kieran stood quietly beside her, not in a suit, but in a dark button-down and slacks, his hand resting lightly on her back. After the speeches ended, an older journalist approached them. "Claire, you've always been bold with your projects, but this one feels personal." She nodded. "It is. Everyone deserves a place that feels like home, not just a roof, but something that gives them dignity, and Kieran reminded me of that." The journalist turned to him. "And what's it like, being married to a woman who can buy half the city?" Kieran didn't hesitate. "It's like being with someone who shows you how big the world is and still makes you feel like you're the center of it." Later that night, as they walked along the river with Zayden skipping ahead of them, Claire slipped her hand into Kieran's. "Do you ever miss anything from your old life?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment. "I miss having less to lose. Back then, everything felt temporary. Now, everything matters." She stopped and looked at him. "You'll never lose me." He brushed a curl away from her cheek. "You promise?" "I promise." Zayden called out from a few steps ahead. "Can we get ice cream?" Claire laughed. "Didn't you just eat dinner?" "Ice cream isn't food," he said firmly. "It's a reward." Kieran shrugged. Hard to argue with that logic. They found a corner stand still open, and the three of them sat on a bench, cones in hand, watching the last streaks of sunlight disappear behind tall buildings. Later that year, Claire surprised Kieran with something that wasn't wrapped in ribbon or sealed in an envelope. They were sitting on the couch, Zayden asleep upstairs, when she handed him a small black and white photo. He stared at it for a long second before realization hit him. "You're serious," she nodded slowly, eyes shining. He set the photo down and pulled her into his arms. "I didn't think I could feel luckier than I already do," she whispered into his chest. "You haven't seen anything yet." 9 months later, their daughter was born on a rainy morning just before dawn. They named her Isla, and when Zayden held her for the first time, he declared himself her forever protector. Kieran built her crib himself white oak with curved edges and a carved quote on the side that read, "You are already loved beyond measure." Claire returned to work part-time, balancing meetings and feedings, never once missing a bedtime. Kieran adjusted his schedule around school pickups and early mornings with Isla. Their lives were full, but never rushed. Every part of their routine was chosen, never forced. On their second anniversary, they didn't throw a party or take a trip. Instead, they gathered friends in the backyard, with string lights and bare feet and lemonade in glass pitchers. There was laughter, music, burnt marshmallows, and a dance in the grass that ended with Claire barefoot in Kieran's arms, swaying to a song neither of them could name. As the night wound down, Claire glanced at the house, the porch light glowing, Isla's soft cries barely audible through the baby monitor, Zayden's dinosaur drawings taped proudly to the windows. She turned to Kieran. "This is what I was waiting for. I just didn't know it looked like this." He kissed her temple. "You built empires, but you built this with your heart." They stayed outside a little longer, not because they were avoiding anything, but because they had everything. And nothing, not money, not titles, not fear, could ever ruin what they'd created. They were not a fairy tale. They were something better, real, whole, forever.